Alright, so today we are going to be doing a video on Reconstruction. So I got a little document for you to get us started. So take out your notes, make sure you're ready to go and follow along. Anything written in red, that's the stuff that you're going to be copying down as usual. So let's get going, and feel free to pause the video at any time. If I'm going too fast, pause the video, write down your notes, and then keep on moving. Alright, so do this at your own pace. So I'm going to get started with a nice cool transition over to our bell ringer. So just like in class we do a bell ringer, here I want you guys to do a bell ringer as well. The first question: can you identify the group on either side of the picture above? Alright, think about it for a second. This is after the Civil War. We have just fought a major war on American soil over a couple different things. We've talked about that in class. So let's think who's on either side, and then try to explain what the two groups are fighting over. And again, keep in mind that historical context as we go through. I'm not going to answer this immediately. We're going to go over it in class, of course, and also I'm going to talk a little bit about it at the end of this video. Alright, so start your bell ringer, give it your best shot, and if you need extra time, pause the video if you need to. Alright, we're going to get going. So, the final battle. General Robert E. Lee is going to surrender on April 9th, 1865 at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. So the Confederate Army had been blockaded, you can see down there on the right, by the Union Army. They have been beaten up across the front, and now at Appomattox Courthouse, Robert E. Lee finally says enough's enough. We can't win this war, and is forced to surrender. So with that, I have a nice little picture of the surrender. Over on the left, you have Ulysses S. Grant, the Union military leader, and we'll talk about what becomes of Ulysses S. Grant and his career later on. And also on the right, Robert E. Lee of the Confederate Army. They all look kind of pretty gentlemanlike, don't they? For just fighting a major war. And then all the Union officers are in the background there. So I thought it was a nice little image to get us going. So with surrender, we turn to Reconstruction. And Reconstruction is a long word for the rebuilding of the South. I gave you the time period, 1865 to 1877. It's all about trying to make the South better, because after the Civil War, they're destroyed. I mean, if you look at the right, some of the housing, that's typical among southern cities. They've been really just wrecked by war. The Civil War was fought primarily on southern soil, and as a result, you get images like you see over here. So we're just going to move this over a little, and we're going to get going. Alright, so let's get political. What I mean by that is, in order to understand Reconstruction, you need to understand who's who, the major players within Reconstruction. So we'll start in the middle group with the Republicans. Now they're led by Lincoln, okay, President Lincoln, and their goal is to rebuild the South. They're not out to get back at the South in any way. They're just trying to rebuild the South, make sure that the South doesn't become an area of decay. We're talking about those buildings. They all have to be rebuilt. And so make the United States strong by rebuilding the South. And they're going to be the party of the North. So northern states typically support the Republican Party at this time in American history. Alright, so there's the Republicans. On the right are the Democrats. Should sound familiar because we still have the Republicans and Democrats today. But the Democrats during Reconstruction and post-Civil War are going to be led by President Johnson, who we'll talk about. He's actually Lincoln's vice president. And they're going to want to keep whites strong. They're all about states' rights and about preserving the privilege that whites had when slavery was in full swing. All right, and they're the party of the South. So Southerners really support the Democrats, while Northerners typically will support the Republicans. The Republicans will try to abolish slavery, while the Democrats will institute laws to try to preserve slave-like conditions for African Americans. And so that's the battle going on. Now, not to confuse you, but to add to that is a group within the Republican Party called the Radical Republicans. Okay, these guys are all about punishing the South. So they are Republican, but they think that people like Lincoln are too nice. They want to go out and punish the South, and they'll pass the 14th and 15th Amendment as well, and that'll be critical for later on. We're going to talk about what each amendment does. So they do actually make some good things happen. So the Radical Republicans are the other group that you need to know about. All right, so these three groups are going on. And one of the constitutional amendments that starts Reconstruction is the 13th Amendment, passed in 1865. And that's going to ban slavery or involuntary servitude in the United States. So here are these two pictures, the breaking the chains of slavery attributed to Abraham Lincoln. And so, real quickly, involuntary servitude just means that if you are forcing someone to work for you, usually without pay, and not allowing them to say yes or no, to that work, that is involuntary servitude. So they put that clause in there to make sure that people didn't try to get around it. Okay, but banning slavery is the 13th Amendment. Now, there's a bunch of different plans to rebuild. There's actually 4 that we're going to talk about people figuring out ways that we can make the South get back to where it was. The first plan is the 10% plan, proposed by Mr. Lincoln himself. All right, and it's going to require only 10% of voters to swear loyalty to the Union, abolish slavery, and offers amnesty, which is like a government pardon. It's a forgiveness by the president to Confederates. So the Confederates that rose up against him, he says, look, I forgive you. Make sure that 10% of your voters swear loyalty to the Union, and make sure that you abolish slavery, and you can come right back to the Union, no questions asked. All right? Lincoln is all about trying to be reasonable. He believes that it's better to just rebuild the South as fast as we can, as opposed to trying to punish them and worry about how we're going to do that. He wants the Union to be strong, and he believes in order for a strong Union to be formed, the South have to be strong too. All right? And so President Lincoln comes up with his 10% plan. On the other side of the coin, you have the Wade-Davis bill. So underneath, I have the 2 senators, Wade and Davis, and they come together. They're Republicans that feel that Lincoln is being too easy on the South. And here's where that radical Republican sentiment starts to really materialize. It really starts to grow here with the Wade-Davis bill. And they're going to require that a majority of whites, meaning more than 50%, must swear loyalty to the Union. Also, they're going to deny the right to vote or hold office, meaning like get into politics, by former Confederates. So if you fought against us, you can't be a senator, you can't be your mayor, you can't be someone of political power, and you also can't vote. And so the Wade-Davis bill is trying to get at punishing those people who stood up against Lincoln and the Union. All right? So this is a hard-nosed bill designed to punish the South. Next to this, while these plans are being formed, the federal government decides to create this thing called the Freedmen's Bureau. Okay? The Freedmen's Bureau is a government agency that will help give basic necessities to those freed slaves that have all of a sudden came about because of the Civil War. So after the Civil War is fought, all these free slaves come out. What are they supposed to do? They don't have land. They don't have a job anymore. They don't have food, water, clothing. And so a lot of these recently freed slaves, they don't know what to do now. And so the Freedmen's Bureau is trying to give these people direction and trying to give these people just what they need to survive in this new world. Okay? And this this bureau is going to be important for later on, okay? I'm not going to give you a spoiler alert just yet, but Freedmen's Bureau, all right? Now, Lincoln will be assassinated, shocker if you didn't know, on April 14th, 1865. The president goes down by John Wilkes Booth. So there's Wilkes Booth in the background at Ford's Theater. President Lincoln going to the theater to watch a little play called Othello. And during the play, John Wilkes Booth comes out and assassinates him. I'm sure Assassin's Creed will have some type of video game going along with that soon enough, right? But on the 14th of April, Lincoln is killed, and that was really a couple days after he had just got the surrender from Robert E. Lee. So Lincoln is able to start to see slavery become banned, but he doesn't get to see Reconstruction actually play out, and that's going to be something that that he'll eventually never see happen. So Lincoln's assassinated, and the result of Lincoln's death is a lot of turmoil. So Vice President, as we talked about before, Andrew Johnson becomes president. And so here's a picture of Johnson over there with his nice little haircut he's got going on. Johnson will propose a milder plan, intent because he is Democrat, okay? He is a Democratic vice president. He's got buddies in the South, and so he's going to try to propose a plan that's milder than that Wade Davis bill that we just talked about. And as a result, Congress and Johnson will clash big time. So the Republicans in Congress, particularly the radical Republicans, really don't like Johnson. So Johnson's plan is this. He says, all right, a majority of voters in the southern state must pledge loyalty to the Union. He agrees with the Wade Davis bill. He makes that concession. He says, okay, you guys got that part right. And yes, I agree that you must ratify the 13th Amendment. Slavery should be abolished before you can come into the Union. But Johnson's plan is milder in the sense that he still believes that former Confederates should be able to vote and hold office. So that's the big caveat there with Johnson's plan, is that he says, all right, I agree with you on your 2 points, but on the third, about not being able to vote, that's wrong. We should be able to allow Confederates to vote and hold office. So that's Johnson's plan. Make sure you write that in, all right? The radical Republican Party is coming together at this point. So when Johnson proposes his plan, the radical Republicans really come together, and the goal becomes to punish Confederate states. So whenever you see radical Republicans, you should be able to associate that with the punishment of those southern states that rebelled, all right? And so here we got something that looks kind of like a trial going on, all right? Again, I'll try to give you a little cliffhanger here. Now the 14th Amendment will be proposed by Congress and eventually becomes a real amendment, and it grants citizenship to African Americans. That's a loaded word, citizenship, to become a citizen. But the result of that, well, we'll talk about that a little bit more in class, the result of that is that former slaves cannot be discriminated because of their race or previous servitude, the fact that they were slaves. The 14th Amendment goes in and says, no, these African Americans are citizens just like you, like the whites of the South, and therefore states have no right to discriminate against them. All right, so it's supposed to protect them. Now, after the 14th Amendment is passed, there becomes another plan to come out. Okay, so this is plan number 4. And in 1867, Republicans in Congress passed the Reconstruction Act. This plan's loaded. It's got a lot of stuff, so stick with me. New constitutions, state constitutions, okay, must be written, or there's no more of those state governments. Okay, so before there were there were governments that were running around that could have a little bit of autonomy, and they say, all right, no, that's it. Write me a constitution where the 14th Amendment's ratified, meaning that you cannot discriminate against people of color, and African Americans within your states must be allowed to vote. All right. This Reconstruction Act is really, really groundbreaking in the sense that it's focusing on allowing African Americans to have more rights. Okay, so 1867, the Reconstruction Act passed, and this is a really great act for African Americans. Now I'm going to hit you with two vocabulary terms here. A scalawag. Yes, you can say it aloud. It's really fun to say. So a scalawag. Any Southerner who supported Reconstruction was termed a scalawag. It's like a negative term. You call this to people that you don't like. All right. So anyone who's going to support Reconstruction that's a Southerner, you call them a scalawag. Even if they weren't, you could still call them it. All right. So if I hear you guys talk and calling each other scalawags, I'll know what it is. And then on the other side is a carpetbagger. All right. Nice little picture of a carpetbagger from the South. Basically, what these people were Northerners who were moving to the South to try to become rich off the destroyed South. So what happens is the Northerners see an opportunity. All these people who just had their houses destroyed, their crops burned, have no jobs, have no place to go. Some of these northern businessmen see an opportunity that they can make a little money off the Southerners. All right, you want your house rebuilt? Let me charge you, $5,000 instead of $1,000 to rebuild it. And so Northerners come down, and these people are referred to commonly as carpetbaggers, that they're just trying to make money off the misery of Southern people. So those are two vocab terms for you to chalk away. And they're fun. They're fun. I like them. All right. Now, Congress versus the President. I don't know if I told you guys about I love boxing, but here's a nice little boxing match for you between Congress and the President. All right, how awesome is that? So Andrew Johnson on one side and Congress on the other, and everyone battling it out. So Democrat and Republican going at it right now, and it really comes to a fever pitch at this point with the impeachment of President Johnson. Okay. Now, there's a common misconception among just people in general that to impeach someone means to kick them out of office. Okay. So let's be smarter than the average person and understand that to impeach someone doesn't mean necessarily to kick them out of office immediately. What it means is that you're accusing the president of wrongdoing. That's what impeachment is. All right. So do not confuse the two. Impeach is not to kick out. Impeach is just to accuse the president of wrongdoing and then go through a trial. So Congress and Johnson will go through that trial. And the big thing out of this is that Johnson was found not guilty. Meaning, after going through it and Congress saying that Johnson was acting outside of the Constitution because his plan was totally benefiting the South, there was not enough evidence and not enough people in agreement that Johnson was actually guilty, and so not guilty is the verdict for Andrew Johnson. And eventually a new president comes to the forefront after Johnson's term ends, and that is war hero Ulysses S. Grant. That guy that I showed you at the table earlier, over on the left there in his military gear, will eventually be wearing a suit in the Oval Office and wins election in 1868. All right, and he is supported by African Americans largely, and so Ulysses S. Grant takes control as president. The 15th Amendment will next be passed. So we talked about the 14th Amendment. Now we're moving to the 15th Amendment, and that's going to forbid any state from denying the right to vote on the basis of race, color, or previous slave status. Meaning, if you were a slave, that does not mean that you cannot be that you can't vote anymore. And we'll talk later in the next video about why that particular amendment is really important, and how Southern states will actually try to go around this clause there in the 15th Amendment about the previous slave status. But the 15th Amendment essentially allows African Americans the right to vote, and that's going to be critical, because if you have the right to vote, you can elect people that hopefully will have your back when policy changes come up. All right, so this amendment will be critical for African Americans. Following this, we have a change in the South. All right, so the Old South we've talked about as kind of like a super agrarian society. They rely on crops, they rely on big plantations, specifically cotton plantations, to make their wealth. Well, after the Civil War, a lot of those cotton plantations were burned down. A lot of the Southerners realized that during the war, they had all this cotton, but they couldn't bring it anywhere because they didn't have the railroads to bring it to and from. They didn't have the manufacturing plants to make the guns, to make the clothes for the troops. They didn't have a lot of those things. And so ultimately, that was kind of like their downfall. And the Southerners react against this and say, all right, how can we make this, our Southern states, stronger? And the New South is this idea that comes out. And the cotton industry will recover by 1880. So towards the end of Reconstruction, the cotton industry picks back up, and that's going to help out the Southern states. And they use that money to build textile factories, to manufacture tobacco products as well, and to create oil refineries, steel mills, coal, iron. All these manufacturing big factories are taking over in the South. And along with that, railroads and it's just an overgrown mining industry take root in the South. So they switch from that plantation economy and start to mirror some of the things in the South, or in the North, and they have resources that the Northerners don't have. This mining industry will be essential for the South because it allows them to create a lot of revenue, a lot of money. And why? So that the South will never again have to depend on the North for manufacturing. They saw how that worked out before, losing the Civil War, and they don't want to do that again. Okay, so the New South should be associated in your mind with industrialization, with building big factories, okay, as opposed to the Old South. That'll be critical. Okay, and I have a picture here that goes through. That's what the Old South looks like on the left. See, you got your cotton plantation going, and then the New South, it's like a totally different place. You've got your trains moving in and out, the large smokestacks, probably it might be a mining facility or an oil refinery down there. At any rate, this Old South and New South really do clash. They are totally just amazingly different from one another. And we're going to kind of look at this a little bit more. But the Old South versus the New South. All right. Now, almost done. Reconstruction will end with the withdrawal of the Union troops from the South in 1877. So, Union troops were used throughout Reconstruction to kind of keep everyone in check, to provide support during Reconstruction as well. But by 1877, the Union is done with Reconstruction. Effectively, feels like they've done all they can, or all that they're willing to do, and withdraw from the South. So that marks the end of Reconstruction. And a couple things that I think you need to keep in mind with Reconstruction is that these amendments, the 13th, the 14th, and the 15th, effectively known as the Reconstruction Amendments. I'm doing my air quotes, you can't see them, but the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments are essential for America as a move forward. They change the way that slavery no longer exists now. You're talking about trying to give rights, voting rights to African Americans and prevent discrimination. So while the battle was not done until the Civil Rights Movement, and some would argue even still today, they at least got started here at Reconstruction. Another thing, segregation becomes the go-to for Southerners in the United States. And in the next video, we're going to talk about what segregation looks like and what types of laws were imposed to keep segregation in place. But segregation in a simple way is basically the separation of races. Whites on one block, blacks on the other block. That separation would go throughout public facilities everywhere. So separate bathrooms, separate water fountains, the whole nine. All right. So segregation imposed in the United States at the end of Reconstruction. And then also, like we talked about with Old and New South, the switch from cotton over to manufacturing. Okay, that switch is just dynamite for the South and really good for the United States as a whole. And again, I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but the concept of the war of northern aggression, that concept of the North being wrong in the Civil War continues to exist even today. There's some bad blood going on. If you ever travel to the South and talk to some people, some of them will still remember and still have a negative spin towards the Northerners. Actually, some of them even call them yuppies. All right, and lastly is a nice little graphic organizer for you guys to keep all the plans straight. I know it was a lot of information thrown at once, so this chart is a way of having the 10% plan, the Wade Davis bill, the Johnson plan, and the Reconstruction Act all on one screen. So if you want to take a picture with your phone, that would be a super smart thing to do, as you're going to need this for later as we go through the graphic organizer activity that I'm going to have you guys do, so that you really get a good handle on these plans, and you're going to make something to show me that you know at least one of these plans really, really well and all of them fairly well. Okay, so we're going to use this screen. It's going to be kind of like a golden key for you guys, if you will. So take a look at it, understand the difference between the plans, Wade Davis bill, Johnson plan, who's sort of making these plans and why, understanding the Democratic Party versus the Republican Party who's trying to punish the South. All right, all of those things will come together in this one graphic organizer that we got. And lastly, I promised that we'd go back to the document that we started with. So here we are. The Southern Confederates are the group that we took that are on the left. The African Americans in the South and freed slaves on the right. And the Freedmen's Bureau is the guy in the middle, moderating the debate among the two, keeping each other from going at it. Because remember, the Southern Confederates had owned these slaves, okay, and these African Americans. And so now when they're free, there becomes an issue. Whites don't want to give African Americans rights. They don't believe that they didn't earn those rights or that they aren't deserving of them. And so that dynamic works itself out in the Reconstruction, and the Freedmen's Bureau is sort of keeping this conflict among emancipation, recently freed African Americans, and putting that in context. So the Freedmen's Bureau, keep that in mind. Remember, the Freedmen's Bureau is all about bringing necessities for African Americans, recently freed slaves, so that they can have some sort of start to emancipation, to freedom. And I believe that is going to be it for our video. So make sure that you have everything written down that is in red. Go through anything that you don't. Go back to the slides. I'm sure they're in there. And great job doing your homework. All you did was watch a video for your homework. Not a bad deal, huh? Okay. Have a good one, guys.